Hello, everybody. I'm Oscar Sarasti. I'm from Texas Tech University. Today, I'm going to present the impact of the Great Recession and the COVID-19 recession on agricultural commodity prices. My co-authors are Dr. Madhuri Amin and Dr. Syed Badrosa. So let's start. Let's dig into it. Let's see. Okay. So it's commonly known that the United States is one of the most important countries with respect to agricultural commodities. The United States in 2019, for example, was the top world exporter of corn, soybeans, wheat, and it's not only restricted to storable commodities that are corn, soybeans, and wheat. They also export lean hog, they export cattle, they export chicken, they export a lot of stuff. So agricultural products and commodities, they are a really important part of the US economy. So as any other commodity in the market, they actually react to economic changes. In this case, we're gonna focus mostly on recessions, that is when the GDP of a certain country goes down, affecting the consumption of the people, the demand for products. So during economic recession, investors are worried about the performance of their investments. How are they gonna get money from what they put the money? It would be better to put money somewhere else. It would be better to start with agriculture. So we want to see how does the different the recessions affect the agricultural commodity. And why is this important? The United States agricultural sector affects 11% of the jobs in the United States, because this not only reflects the farmers, it reflects the companies that make products for consumption, exporters, importers, the people that actually work with creating chemicals for the plants and things like that. So agriculture is a really important part of the United States economy and the United States labor. So let's see how does the Great Recession affect it. So the Great Recession was known in 2008, the housing crisis. It has more economic effects, long-term economic effects compared with the recession of the 1990, 1991 and the 2001 recession. But the agricultural sector reacted a little different during this recession. In the Great Recession, for example, wages for agricultural workers, they were up because since there were restrictions there were restrictions in the illegal workers of the people that usually work on farms. The farms wanted to hire people, not matter the cost, because the demand were up for basic agricultural commodities. Also, it has been shown that states that relied on agriculture recovered faster for the financial crisis, thanks for the GDP dependence on agriculture. And because of the speculation, there was a point in the commodities that they have a spikes on prices. Some of the agricultural commodities have the biggest spike in prices, the highest price record during the Great Recession. So we're going to see that after. And the other hand, we have the COVID-19 recession. The COVID-19 recession, like most of us know, it started on February 2020, consequence of the COVID-19. And the thing here, the difference between any other pandemic, any other recession, this was a pandemic-induced recession. It's not like the economy was going wrong and all the indicators. No, the thing with this is like everybody was forced to lock down to reduce the spread of the disease. There was panic buying, panic shopping. The governments in the world were they have the awareness that they rely too much on other governments in other countries for their food dependence. So they want to reduce that. So there were a lot of things happening during that time. And we are going to check how that affected the agriculture. There were effects in the agricultural supply chain. For example, the case of cattle, some factories, a lot of factories in the United States were forced to close down operations due to the COVID and the extent of the COVID-19. We took a long time for the vaccine in order to everything become normal again in a certain way. So we are going to see how that affects. So we have our objectives. Our first objective is to analyze to what extent the effects of the two recessions have in agricultural commodities, and how much they are similar or how much they are different. We are going to use 6 agricultural commodities. We're going to use corn, soybeans, and wheat. They are considered storable commodities because they can be on barns for a longer period of time, or people can avoid harvesting those in a specific time. They can be on the plant. And we're going to contrast those with cattle, hogs, and milk that they highly require you to sell at the moment because refrigeration, keeping them in certain places require a lot of investment. They don't have. So our empirical models are going to be at the structural break to see the difference on the means. We are going to use a generalized autoregressive model to test for the volatility of the model. And we are going to use a vector of autoregressive framework to see how the commodities are related. For the structural breaks, we are using, I'm sorry, was too much. Okay. For the structural breaks, we're using the different technique that tests for multiple structural breaks. What this technique makes is that they take the difference between one.
5 or 6.
There is room that sell about 20.
Really?
Yeah. It's a popular talk.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What they say. The participant. This computer's a little slow, so. No, we got this one. Thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulty. So we're going to use the descent approach. That is a 2-step approach. In the first step, we are looking for structural breaks. And in the second step, we are predicting when is the date of those structural breaks. We're going to use a Garch model, a simple Garch model, just to test for volatility, as I explained before. And we're going to use a vector of autoregression to see the relationship they have between different agricultural commodities. For the data we use, we're using data from January 1st, 2006 until December 31st, 2021. The data, according to the literature, is going to be divided in 3 parts. The 3 parts correspond to the Great Recession period, starting in January 2006 to June 2009, when the recession was over. The second period encompasses the time between the recessions, and the third period encompasses from January 2018 until December 2021. So first of all, I'm going to present the commodities time trend. So as you can see here, the commodities tend to react different to the recession time. This is a example of corn. This spike in prices for corn was due to the oil industry when people start using ethanol for oil consumption. So that explains that spike on prices. But when we go to the volatility for the 2 periods, we can see that during the recession periods, the volatility of the prices tends to be greater compared with no recession periods, in the case of corn. We can see that the same trend has for soybeans. We can explain that spike on prices in between the recessions due to the boom for the ethanol in the oil. But as well, we can see here that during the volatility times, during the recession times, the commodities tend to be more volatile with respect to the prices. The thing, we have the same effect with wheat during the recession period. Okay. During the recession period, we can see that volatility of price is greater. And that happens with all the storable commodities. That's what they have in common. In the case of non-storable commodities, we can see that the volatility even exists, but the volatility is smaller compared with the volatility that the storable commodities present. So that means that the non-storable commodities need to be sold fast, so they don't mess too much with the prices. We have that example here with lean cattle. We have that with lean hog. Also remains the same. In the case of prices of milk, there's some spikes in prices. They don't differ too much. And in the time we're measuring the volatility, we can see the same trend. There's not a specific difference in trend between the recession period compared with the non-recession period. So for the statistical analysis, we conducted some diagnosis tests. We make the Lundbox test, the arch branch multiplier, and something that actually we found is like storable commodities and non-storable commodities need to be different in the statistical analysis. For example, for storable commodities, we found that there is an arch effect. So they need to be used a large model. Instead, for the non-storable commodities, we see that we can use a simple AAEA model. So it's really, the thing here is really interesting to see that even in the same period, the commodities react different, and each commodity requires a different statistical analysis. So we conducted independent of, for example, corn, it might be needing one statistical process in the Great Recession and another for the COVID recession to explain the variability and to make possible forecasts for the recuperation period. We also did variance covariance to find how correlated they are. We can see here that the storable commodities like corn, soybeans are really dependent on the prices one another. But one thing we see the difference is, for example, in the Great Recession period, we can see that live cattle is, the lean hog is not really dependent on corn, but for the COVID recession period, we can see that lean hog really depends on the prices of corn. So the interesting thing here is like, depending on the period, the commodities reacted different. With the time that passes, the commodities also, the prices reacted different and depending each other in a different way than they used to be before. Here we have the statistical test for the structural breaks. We found that most of the commodities have more than one structural break. The different changes on the means. We found approximately they have between 8 or 9, but it's more interesting when we see the graph. We can see here the difference. For example, during the Great Recession period, there were a lot of structural breaks, but most of the structural breaks for corn happened before the Great Recession. Instead, in the case of the COVID-19 recession, most of the structural breaks happened during the recession period. So we can see that, for example, here in the disease-induced recession, the commodities react highly different in the change of their mean. And it's important. And the same thing happened along a lot of the commodities. We can see in soybeans, most of the structural breaks happened before the recession period. In the COVID-19, most of the structural breaks happened during the recession period. We have the same happens on wheat. Instead, when we talk about the non-storable commodities, it's the opposite. Most of the structural breaks happen before the recession periods and not during the recession period. And that's a constant trend in live cattle, in lean hogs, and on milk. And we were talking about the large models and the RIMA models. I'm sorry. We can see that the commodities need to be treated different. For example, they are dependent on the volatility of the previous period. For selecting each model, we conducted and we use for the lags an IAC, and for the model, we use a log likelihood radio test to select the best model. And we can see that change. For example, soybeans, has an arch to 1 during the Great Recession period. But during the COVID period, it's only depends on 1 arch and 2 arch and 1 arch period. So there needs to be different for the forecast if we want to conduct that part. And something similar happens for the ARMA predictions. The statistical significance depends highly on the recession period. And finally, sorry, I'm going that fast. When we were talking about the vector autoregression, we can see that the storable commodities depend on each other. The prices are really correlated, but the prices with respect to non-storable commodities change through time. In some periods, they are statistically significant, and in other recession periods, they are not statistically significant. So we need to understand that they behave different depending on the recession period they are. Sorry. Yes. So the conclusion is that we found multiple structural breaks in our data, and there are differences in the structural breaks, as we can notice. There are more structural breaks in a financial recession or in a COVID recession. So they behave really different, the recession, depending if it's a bank-induced recession or a disease-induced recession. The results show also that there's presence of volatility in prices, and given the diagnosis test, each commodity needs to be treated different depending on the specific time period we want to analyze. And there's a difference between the storable and the non-storable commodities if we want to do the statistical analysis. Thank you. If you have any questions, please. I'm sorry, first. The data we use from investing.com, that is a page that collects all the Chicago Mercantile Exchange data. They have the daily opening and closing prices for all the agricultural commodities and non-agricultural commodities. For example, they have there the prices of oil, they have the prices of gold, silver. So it's a really it's become really more used on research lately. So because it's Chicago Mercantile Exchange data. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The estimated structural breaks, we have an estimated dates. We haven't conducted that part yet, but we are going to see how the policy effects during those periods actually also affected how the commodities behave during that. It's a really good point. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for explanation of what those structural breaks happen, yeah, that really helped. Because we also conducted a model that we put the commodities trying to see the structural breaks at the same time, and there was no effect. So definitely there's an external factor more than only the price. Yes, I can see both for that. Yes, sir. Mhm, 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 mhm. Yeah. Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah. And also, for example, one of the interesting things on that is, for example, the Great Recession, there was an entry there was a moment everybody, the central bank said, okay, it's over. Here with the COVID, there's not, can't be declared an end for it. And so, for example, if we want to do the forecast of recovery time for the Great Recession was around the first 10 months after the Great Recession, all the price levels were the same. And we can see the effects of the government intervention of that part. But here for the COVID, we don't know yet. So if we want to contrast both of them, it's really hard because also the recession period is so different. How it happened is really different. Mhm. Any questions? No? Thank you very much.
Hello, can everyone hear me? I apologize for my voice. I have not been in a conference and, since 2019. So of course, after talking to all my new colleagues, everyone I know now, I've lost my voice. So thank you for making time to come to this presentation. Today, I will be discussing the resiliency of U.S. pork packing during the COVID-19 pandemic. This work was done, I'm an ERS economist, my name is Samantha Padilla. This work was jointly done with University of Iowa State University, the Department of Economics, specifically Lee Schultz. I want to state a disclaimer for my presentation. The findings and conclusions of this presentation are those of the authors and should not represent any official USDA or US government determination or policy. And this presentation was supported by the US Department of Agriculture Economic Research Service. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of context, Oscar did a great job introducing what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. As you probably know, we had hog slaughter plants temporarily shutting down and reducing production during the start of the pandemic. The stories of supermarkets having shortage of pork products, specifically some bacon and whatnot. And that was in part due because total hog slaughter fell about 35% below the 2019 levels.
Hi, Sam. On Zoom, we can't see your slides.
Oh, thank you. Oh, new share. I'm sorry. I think it's only. I put it for screen, so whenever people switch, it doesn't. Can you guys see it now? People in the.
Yes, you're good.
Thanks. I don't want to open the chat because that would take 2 years and we only have 15 minutes. Okay, thank you for bearing with me. So all of these changes that were happening, not only in hog slaughter, but also in beef, really brought interest to trying to examine the effects of COVID-19 and whether bigger plants were more susceptible to these disturbances. Are we too concentrated? Are these plants too large that they can fail and really disrupt the supply chain? So with that in mind, there is also a policy and budget component. This is important because the United States is spending money in trying to increase processing capacity, as we saw in more recently in January 2022. So this is all just to motivate this topic and why it's important to try to understand the role of plant sites in determining the resiliency of the entire supply chain. So I will leave you with my research question. Did physical plant capacity, which I defined as number of hogs slaughtered, how many hogs a plant can slaughter in a day, and county level factors affect pork packers' responses to the pandemic and their resilience during the first year of COVID-19. So I will be using a definition for resilience for Morgan Dewey, Hotbod, and Biggs et al. 2015, which is whether the system was able to recover from shocks and adapt to change. I will also try to motivate the importance of this presentation by stating that this is the first study to use plant level daily slaughter data to examine resilience. So my empirical strategy. So I have two models that I will be discussing in this presentation, and we will be examining the probability of first, a plant temporarily shutting down, and then second, a plant reducing daily slaughter. Because these variables are both binary, I will be using correlated random effects probit, and I will be presenting the average partial effects. I do, for the second continuous measure of slaughter, I have the results, but I don't think I will have time to present them. But if I do, I will show you some of the things that I thought were interesting from that. Okay, I do not want you to freak out. I am not in the business of putting in 15-minute presentations equations, but I do want to highlight what we're interested here. We're interested in, sorry, how do I hide this? Okay, I do want to highlight that we're interested in the average partial effect of plant size on first, whether a plant temporarily shut down or whether it reduced production. Some of the things that we're going to be including in our regression are plant size, the 7-day moving average of COVID-19 cases at the county level, minimum temperature in the closest weather station to the plant, some monthly fixed effects, plant level, county level, and state characteristics. Hello, welcome. Okay, so I will be discussing my really cool data that nobody has access to. This is probably what's going to get this paper published. So I am using AMS, so Agricultural Marketing Service plant level data. So this is our primary data set, and we have daily information on the 40 largest federally inspected hog slaughter plants in the US from April 2020 to March 2021. So these plants account for at least 90% of the total hog slaughter in the US. So they make up the bulk. And just to give you a little bit of information, there's about 630 pork plants in the US. I have information on 40, and we're almost able to capture entirely what gets slaughtered in this country. So the data includes daily volumes, so how much each plant slaughter, their physical capacity, and their baseline operational capacity. So if a plant can slaughter 2,000 hogs, that's their maximum capacity. The baseline operational capacity would be how much do they normally slaughter, so their normal level. It might not be equal to their physical capacity. It's usually a little bit less. So we merge this with time invariant plant characteristics, so the age of the plant. We have a rough measure of the number of employees, the distance from the closest metro area, so just as controls for this estimation. So here's a preview of the plant. So I am showing on the y-axis the share of pork plants, and then on the x-axis the dates. So shutdown, as you can see, was less common in the beginning of the pandemic. So all the way to the left was less common than reduced slaughter. So a higher share of pork plants opted to reduce slaughter than to shut down. And as you can see, I need this, but I want to be close to my graph. As you can see, towards the later part of the year, so 2021, there were even fewer shutdown decisions and a lot more reduced slaughter. So this should give you an indication of what we're going to see in the results, that it was more common for larger plants to opt to reduce slaughter a little bit if they were having some shortage of workers than to completely shut down. In fact, some of the shutdowns that we see, specifically this one, all of the park plants closed there have to do with a federal holiday. So they are not necessarily because of the pandemic. Okay, so other data. So to this data, we merged it with county level restricted case data from the CDC. We have average minimum temperature. We also use US Census county level information and demographics. So we use population density, whether the county is a population loss county, which is defined as a county that has consistently in each census or every 10 years lost population, and whether there is positive net job creation in the county. We also, because a limitation of this data set is that we only have the large plants, which how can we really assess the value chain if we don't consider smaller plants? So to try to control for some of this, we include the number of small and very small pork plants in the state. And then finally, stay-at-home orders. So here, just something interesting that I thought when I created this graph. So the red line represents average minimum temperature in the counties that have a pork plant in the data set and the COVID cases. So you can see that there's somewhat of an inverse relationship here. But I mean, I think this is just something really interesting because you can't even, not that you can't trust this graph, but that it's so interesting, but it might not even be true, right? Because like in the beginning, COVID cases were not being reported as widely as they were towards the later part of the year, but the ones that were reported show kind of a nice inverse relationship. Okay, so my first set of results. So I like to preface my results before I show you the graphs, just to prepare to what you're gonna see. So we do not find a relationship between physical slaughter capacity and the probability of a plant shutting down over the entire period. And I will go back to the slides. So we're going to be looking right at the average partial effect of plant size, so B1, B4. But I also want to point out that I will be showing an interesting relationship between plant size over time, so that interaction effect. So as you can, yeah, so there is not overall the entire study, but we do find that large plants were more likely to shut down in the first couple of months of the pandemic, just by looking at that interaction effect. But the average partial effect overall was not significant. We did find that plants located in a county that experienced population decline, so a population loss county, were 3 percentage points more likely to shut down. And we also found that COVID cases had an impact in the probability of shutting down, but it was very small. As you can see, only increasing, if the moving average increased by 1,000, which didn't always happen, the probability of shutting down only increases by 0.11 percentage points. Okay, I have to speed up for a minute. Okay, so these are the results. As you can see, they're smaller in magnitude. That's why I tried to, in the slide before, give you an idea of what they look like. As you can see, plant capacity is not statistically significant. And what was kind of significant was daily temperature, right? As temperature increased, it was less likely for a plant to shut down. And also the control. So April 2020 and May 2020 were highly significant with a large magnitude. And that's because we saw most closures happening there. Okay, so the question that comes to mind, was plant capacity more important at the onset of the pandemic? So this is showing you that interaction coefficient. As you can see in the first two, they are statistically significant, so they are purple, and then it slowly declines, but they're not significant. We do see an effect in August 2020 and in January 2021, and both of these can be explained by holidays. So August 2020, a lot of plants do what is called a floating holiday, where after, the summer is like a high grilling, meat consuming period. So after that happens, they offer workers a holiday in August, and a lot of plants do it at the same time. So that's why do we see an effect. And January 2021 would be Martin Luther King Day, which is not a grilling holiday, so plants offer it readily. Okay, so my second set of results is whether or not plants reduce to slaughter. And we actually do find a statistically significant effect between plant physical slaughter capacity and the decision to, and whether or not plants reduce slaughter. So a 1,000 unit increase in daily slaughter would lead to close to 1 percentage point increase in the probability of reducing slaughter. Something that was really interesting to me was that stay-at-home owners were statistically significant, and the effect was kind of large. And again, we also see population loss county matter a lot to determine whether a plant would slaughter or not. So these are the effects. Plant capacity is significant, but smaller in magnitude. And something also to point out is that the average causal effects on May and June were really large compared to those for the decision to shut down. And just again to show that it was more likely for a plant to reduce slaughter even in the beginning of COVID-19 than it was to shut down. Okay, so again, my conclusion, this is the first study to use plant level data to examine how some plant characteristics affected shutdowns and slaughter reductions and total slaughter volumes during COVID-19. We found that some of the variables that had the largest impact were related to labor, and that COVID-19 affected vulnerabilities that existed in packing plants since before the pandemic. So moving forward, we hope that we can expand this research to include 2022. So I got access to that. I got access to that data very recently. So looking at that and potentially trying to get a better measure of the labor decisions within the plants. So yeah, thank you so much. You can ask me any questions right now, but if you don't feel like asking a question, you can feel free to email me or contact me however you want. So, here's some cute pigs. Yes. So daily minimum temperature has been found to be highly correlated with COVID-19 incidents and breakouts. So we wanted to tease out a little bit more of that effect. There is significant research that has been done that lower temperatures would lead to higher instances of COVID-19. And if you think about it, there's another component to that. If there's a winter storm in the Midwest, getting to the pork plant might be difficult. So you might have some worker shortages like that, and that could affect slaughter decisions. Yeah. And that could definitely be true, right? So like having, I don't know if you remember, but early in the pandemic, people were like, we made it through summer, everyone's gonna be outside, this is gonna stop. But then the pandemic continued into the winter where everyone was indoors, everyone wanted to see their family, and that led to an increase in cases for sure. So I'm pretty sure that there, as you can see in the graph, there is some correlation between both of these variables, but before I ran the estimation, I checked to make sure that they weren't too highly correlated. So I know that multicollinearity is not a big concern. If they're too high, it can bias some standard errors. Yes, any more questions? Yes. Yes, second table. Oh, I should have said that because my branch just told me to mention that in my. So these are standard errors and these are average special effects or the theory standard estimation. Yeah, so can you repeat that last part? Yeah, their level. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really interesting. That is for sure something we can explore with my collaborators. I hadn't thought about that at all, to be honest. But that's a great question. And if you want to reach me after the presentation, I'm happy to take notes on what you said, because right now I'm missing a pen and a paper. So, but yeah, that's a great question. That's a great point. Terry, do you have a question, boss? You look like you want to ask me a question. He's looking at me like he wants to ask me something. Okay, so thank you so much for coming. I'm happy to discuss this after, if any of you guys wants to talk about port plans. I guess I didn't check the questions, and there are questions in the chat, but oh, okay. I don't know if you see that.
It's so funny. Hey, hello guys. My name is Adalto. I'm a PhD student in agricultural economics from University of Nebraska, Lincoln. And today I will present a paper that's being developed by me and by Dr. Walters, who is watching the presentation, and Dr. Richard Perry and Professor Lilian Fujimit, in which we analyze the connection between insurance and productivity change for a sample of Nebraskan farmers. So in the literature of the risk of inputs changing risk, how inputs changing risk can affect production decisions, how insurance affect production decisions, there are many papers analyzing how this change in the risk can affect input allocation. So there are, for example, by affecting by affecting risk, policies like the crop insurance can change the profit maximization problem of a producer, inducing intensification in the use of some inputs in detriment of other inputs. But there is a gap in this literature when we talk about the technical choice. As Mundlach described, the implemented technology is a subset of the technology, of the existing technology. And the decision for the implemented technology is based on a profit maximizing problem. So by this mechanism, by the effect of insurance at the expected revenue and the cost that it implies related to the premium insurance, it's expected that insurance would affect the technical choice, leading to change in productivity. So basically, this paper is a first attempt. It's still in work in progress, and we are trying to connect through a theoretical mechanism this effect of insurance and the productivity change. So the idea is that production under risk, under natural disasters, leads to estimated residuals of a production function that behave like that. So if you run a least squares regression for a production function and you made the residuals, under loss, you observe some distribution like this green tail with the black tail, which means that there is a positive skewness in the residuals due to the loss caused by disasters. The effect of insurance by compensating for loss for a specific yield determined and for a given area of coverage, the effect of the insurance is to compensate this loss due to disasters, leading to a distribution that has not a positive experience like it has before, which would affect the expected production. So the specification we adopt to model this effect of insurance by compensating production loss is a specification that's pretty similar to the specification adopted for models in which we analyze technical efficiency. Basically, we have a production function, a technical parameter A, multiplying a function of the inputs allocation multiplied by the exponential of UIP, where UIP is strictly positive. So this term UIP is the term that measures those losses, strictly negative loss caused by the disasters. And insurance compensates those losses affect that term UIP. So the idea is that by specifying the production function in this way and consider those effects of the insurance and those laws in the profit maximization problem, we can obtain the connection between technical choice and insurance decisions. So here, the first framework we have, very simple, is consider a Cobb-Douglas production function and a Hicks-neutral effect of the insurance in the technical choice. So the idea is that farmers can choose different technologies that are more or less productive, and there is a cost related to the adoption of such technology. And in their profit maximization problem, choosing technology for a set of inputs predetermined, they choose the increase or decrease in productivity delta A to be implemented the next period based on their expectation. So from the first order conditions, because we have production in this problem, expected production, and because insurance affects this term of expected production, the whole technology would be a function of insurance. In this specification, we needed to consider some limitations of our data set. So this is why we have this very simple model, because our data set is a financial data set. So we have data for expense and for revenues from Nebraskan farmers. In this case, we don't have data for quantities and price that we could use for a dual approach that would lead to more insights. So we needed to think about a strategy to model in the primal space this phenomenon. And also, we don't have instrumental variables to consider possible endogeneity issues. So the idea is that under maximization of expected profit, the residual term of the production function doesn't appear in the problem, the maximization problem, and the final technology is not a function of the residuals of the production function. What solves any concerns, eliminates any concerns about endogeneity. So the final conclusion from this model is that replacing, assuming a multiplicative form for this expression for delta IP, we can linearize this expression and we can replace that in a production function, what allows to estimate the effect of insurance or productivity or frontier. Another important point is that we see that there is expected price problem, and in that they play a role in the technical choice. But assuming that farmers are under perfect competition, we can assume that they are facing the same expected price. And by this assumption, we can use done for time fixed effects that would control for possible for the price effects that are not observable in such case. So finally, the marginal impact of insurance, the semi-elasticity of the production in respect to the insurance can be estimated from its regression. And finally, we can make inference about how much the insurance contributed to the production due to this effect on productivity. So we have the financial data set that we use for that, the Bean from University of Minnesota. And we have as output the gross production, the gross crop income. So we corrected this variable, we deflated this variable using the USDA crop index. We have labor in highly unpaid hours, and we have land in total crop acres, capital as expense, machinery lease and depreciation, and crop expense, and finally insurance and irrigation. Those other variables, the number of family members, socioeconomic variables, and some financial related variables like money borrowed per acre, they were used because we specify our problem using a stochastic frontier framework. So it's important, essential to specify the variance of the inefficiency term correctly to obtain constant estimators. So those variables are supposed to affect efficiency, technical efficiency, and then we included them as a vector of efficiency changing variables. The insurance, the measure of insurance we have here before I go to proceed is the expense in premium. And we don't have the area covered by insurance. So to correct for possible difference in premium, they use the reference rate for corn. That's an index that's directly related to the cost of insurance for crop producers. And crop is and corn is the main crop for such farmers. So we use this reference rate for corn to correct the insurance variable. That's an expense. So we estimated the model through two different strategies estimators. The first one is the fixed effects from Schmidt and Sickles. It's a two-step approach. So first we estimate the frontier, and after that we estimate the technical efficiency and the effect of the efficiency changing variables in the technical efficiency. But here we are just interested in the frontier, the effect of insurance in the frontier, because we suppose that the effect of the insurance in the frontier is the effect on productivity change due to the mechanism I discussed before. But the effect of insurance in efficiency is the compensation that changes the distribution of the residual. That's already accounted when we see the insurance income, the payment received by the farmers through compensations. So we just analyze the effect at the frontier. So this is what our theoretical model says that's the impact on productivity. So through this model, we see a similar scale elasticity of 0.86, and we see that for each dollar of premium paid per acre, we have a 0.4% increase in production. But this model has a limitation. That is, it's a two-step estimator for stochastic frontier. And the two-step estimators are, I know, by being biased in the parameters, by providing biased parameters for the frontier. Then we estimated this model using the same vector of variables for a one-step estimator, that's the stochastic frontier fixed effects of green. In this estimator, in this framework, we estimate everything the same step, the frontier and the efficiency part. And here we can obtain the parameter from the frontier, from the first part of the table. We can obtain the parameter from the frontier that relates the crop insurance with the productivity. The first results observed just from the specification is that the crop insurance affects positively, the productivity and irrigation also affects positively. And we have the expected behavior for the elasticities, all of them positive. And for the efficiency changing variables, we see some interesting results relating number of family members. That's negative on efficiency. Those effects should be interpreted as effects on efficiency, and they should be interpreted considering the opposite sign. So this is the impact of those variables in the variance of the efficiency index, negatively related to the impact of those variables in the expected efficiency level. So we see negative relation between family members and efficiency, and positive relation between experience and money borrowed per acre and insurance, negative effect of personal over gross income. So we can conclude basically that when the farmer has more pressure to produce efficiently, like when the farmer has a higher debt, he can produce, he has more incentives to produce efficiently, which leads to higher efficiency level. In the experience, as a test in the literature, also increasing efficiency. And by the other way, when the farmer has a higher share of the income coming from other source of farm source, there is a smaller level of efficiency because there's more dependence on the production inside of the farm. So from those models, from from those models, we can recover the time fixed effect that explain the productivity change not explained by insurance and irrigation. And we can see here the behavior of the productivity change for the sample of farmers. And we see interesting result. There's a negative relationship between technical change and the rate to output price, input price. Because we don't have a dual model here, we cannot explain well, interpret well this relationship, but it provides some insights that can be used to improve or to add a model to lead to a more structural interpretation of this relationship. Finally, from those parameters, we can calculate the contribution of the insurance to the productivity. And we calculate that for each dollar of premium, there is a return of $3.50 due to the effects on productivity. So the first model, the model that estimates the frontier and the efficiency in 2 steps. And so the second model, that's the more consistent model according to the literature, we have that for each dollar of premium has $1.96 in impact in production due to impacts on productivity. When we calculate the aggregated effect, the contribution of the insurance for the productivity and how much it represents, we see that the second model, that's the more constant one in our perception, the indirect effects of insurance, that are the effects of insurance in productivity, contribute to production, represent 5%, almost 5% of the total observed crop related income. So the conclusions is that through this framework, that's very simple, still need to be improved. We can relate insurance to productivity and calculate the possible impacts of insurance on productivity. And we found that the insurance impacted positively the productivity for Nebraska farms. The limitations, as I mentioned, are the scarce data, and that the insurance also potentially leads to structural change in input allocation. So the next step is to assume that the technical choice can be non-Hicks neutral, so it can lead to technical bias effect due to the insurance decisions. And it would be interesting also to develop this approach for a dual model, for a dual approach that would lead to a more broad interpretation of those effects. But yeah, for now, this is all. Let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, the total acres of the farm. No. Yeah. So you mean that it should be interesting to analyze to specify in a non-linear way this relationship, because it makes all sense to like a quadratic form, maybe, or more flexible relationship. Yeah. Yeah, of course. There are many papers analyzing insurance decisions. So in this approach, we need to assume that the insurance decision is made one step before this decision for technical things. So it's kind of, the firm decides the level that you cover the next period. And after that, based on that, he decides how much you invest to change the technology or to increase productivity by making any technical choice. It's a limitation we have. Because we don't have all of the variables we need to model everything together. It will require more developed approach. It's very limited data set in the sense. And there are other pods that can be correlated with the insurance. Also, we have some problems to control for that. So very challenging because at the same time, you need to conciliate something that's theoretically robust and a very limited data set. So this is the challenge we are facing now, and we are working on that now, trying to obtain, to extract the maximum information we can from this. Any other questions? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm the last speaker of this session. I'm Yue from Iowa State University. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Economics. And this paper is about the precautionary motives in corn seeding rate choices. And this is a joint work with Dr. David Hennessy from Iowa State University and also Dr. Cindy Yu from Iowa State University and Dr. Alexander Lindsay from the Ohio State University. Okay, this is the outline of my presentation. First, I will state about the motivation and research questions and the main findings, then the conceptual model and the data, also empirical analysis methods and results, and then conclusion. First, motivation. As we all know, the agriculture production and also crop production is associated with uncertainty such as a price uncertainty and also the production uncertainty induced by, for example, the weather. And production uncertainty influences production decisions. And crop producers may over-apply or under-apply inputs through precautionary motives when they face production uncertainty. And in this paper, we studied the establishment uncertainty. This is also an important type of uncertainty in crop production. The establishment uncertainty means that the proportion of seed that a farmer planted in the land that can the proportion of the planted seed that can grow up as a plant stand is uncertain to farmers, and the establishment rate could be influenced by factors such as weather, soil conditions, diseases, and pests. And seeding rate, seed is an important input in crop production, and seeding rate choice is also crucial for the crop production because obviously a seed directly influences the output level, and seed cost is a major cost is a major part of crop production. For example, for us, many crops, including corn, soybean, seed cost is one of the largest cost of the total production cost. And also seed has environmental impacts. That is to say, a seed may generate negative externalities. So for example, from the application of neonicotinoid seed treatment. So this kind of seed treatment is a way to control the pests, and the neonicotinoid is usually it's directly applied to the seed as a seed coat. And when you plant the seed into the soil, only a small portion of the chemical of neonicotinoids, this chemical material can be uptaken by the crop plant stand, and the majority of neonicotinoids, they will disperse into the environment, and they may cause negative impacts to some non-target organisms such as bird, butterfly, and honeybees. So this is important to understanding, and it's important and also interesting to understanding how establishment uncertainty affect the optimal seeding rate choice. The establishment rate is uncertain to farmers, but at the same time, the risk could be managed. And if increased establishment uncertainty increases seeding rate, then instruments like crop production management practices or technologies or insurance contracts that can reduce the establishment or profit uncertainty could help reduce farmers' precautionary demand for seed. And also a reduced seed demand could generate profit gain for farmers and also environmental benefits for the society. And then I would like to state the two research questions of this paper and also the main findings from our analysis. So the first question is we wonder how would changing establishment uncertainty impact optimal seeding rate? So our finding is that there indeed exists precautionary seed demand in corn seeding rate decisions. That is to say, increasing establishment uncertainty increases the optimal seeding rate choice. And the second, we further ask that how would management practices impact establishment uncertainty and optimal seeding rate choices. So our finding indicates that tillage, the adoption of tillage and a crop rotation and also proper planting date can help reduce establishment uncertainty and also the optimal seeding rate. Then I will go to the details of the analysis. First, the conceptual model. So it's first we consider the corn producers' objective function as the maximization of expected profit. P here is the output price, and F here is the yield response to plant density function. So H represents to the plant density. That is to say the number of plant stand per unit of land. And H is further a function of seeding rate S. S, again, it is the number of seed per unit of land. And R represents the establishment uncertainty. It is a random variable subject to distribution phi R here. And W is the input price. So from the first order condition, we can see that the expectation of the left-hand side depends on the distribution of R. So we can see that the changing distribution in R, which represents the changing in the establishment uncertainty, could have impact, may have impact on the optimal seeding rate choice, the S star. And then this paper So further investigate this problem by some empirical method. So basically, we need to estimate the related part of the maximization problem setup, and then we conducted some simulation. So the data we used are from 93 agronomic trials from corn production conducted by the Michigan State University and Ohio State University in 5 years. Oh, sorry. The trial data is from Ohio State University. So from 10 counties in Ohio during 5 years. And the main variables we use are seeding rate, plant density, and also the yield. The data also has records for several different management practices, categories such as the tillage types and crop rotation. There are 3 types of previous crops. For example, if the previous crop is soybean, then the crop rotation is that the farmers plant corn after soybean. And then we also have the data for seed traits, and those traits are resistant to pests, including those types. And recall the farmers' profit maximization problem, and we have 5 steps in our empirical analysis. First, we estimate the yield response to plant density FH. We adopted non-parametric estimation technology, a local polynomial estimation. So we use this method to try to reduce the issue of model misspecification. And the second step, we estimate the plant density response to seeding rate, HSR. And to give a structure to the uncertainty term R, we adopted the stochastic frontier model. And then we simulate the impacts of changing establishment uncertainty on optimal seeding rate choices. Next, we estimate the impacts of management practices on establishment uncertainty by adopting a heterostochastic stochastic frontier model. And at last, we simulate the impacts of management practices on optimal seeding rate choices. I will briefly go through each step due to the time limitation. So first, it's the estimation of yield response to plant density. This is the estimated response curve. You can see it's concave and also asymmetric. So it's first derivative, it's second derivative negative, so it's concave, and third derivative positive. And it's interesting to look at the positive third derivative. This first implies the asymmetry of the yield response curve, and also according to Rothschild and Stiglitz paper, this positive third derivative have indications on the impact of risk on the input choice under some assumptions. So first, if we assume the plant density response to seeding rate function is this form, so it's S and R are additive. And then if we assume the R is subject to mean preserving spread, then the conclusion follows that the increase in establishment uncertainty increases optimal seeding rate choice. This is conclusion followed by the positive third derivatives of the yield response function. But our analysis doesn't stop here. We do not have these 2 assumptions, and with our empirical method impose other structures. So yeah, this is our the estimation of plant stand density to seeding rate, and we adopted the stochastic frontier model. And V and U here are 2 random two components of the arrow term, and they represent the establishment uncertainty. So V is subject to a normal distribution, and U is subject to a half normal distribution. And V represents the randomness of the production frontier, and U represents the technology inefficiency and also the deviation from the production frontier. So next, after the estimation of the stochastic frontier model, we simulate the impact of changing the scale of risk on the optimal seeding rate choices. So since the sigma U and sigma V represents the magnitude of establishment uncertainty, so I simulate their impacts on the optimal seeding rate. And also, since the sigma U is could be managed by the producers, since it's related to the technical inefficiency or the choice of management practices or technologies, we mainly focus on its impact on the optimal seeding rate. So what we can see from this table is that as the sigma U increases, the optimal seeding rate also increases. So this indicates that there exists precautionary motives in optimal seeding rate choices when farmers face establishment uncertainties. And then we further investigate how different management practices impact the establishment uncertainty, and specifically it's the estimation of management practice specific sigma. Our finding is that first, the adoption of tillage reduces establishment uncertainty, and also the adoption of wheat corn and soybean corn rotations reduce the uncertainty. Then late planting date reduces the uncertainty. So I can give a quick intuition for this finding. So the adoption of tillage types could provide better growing conditions for the crops, and also the wheat crop rotation may help to manage the pests. So it is also beneficial for the seed germination. And a late planting date usually have warmer temperature, and this is also a benefit for the seed germination. So this is why these management practices could help reduce the establishment uncertainty and have the potential to reduce the seeding rate choices. Okay, yeah, so at last, a conclusion. So corn producers have precautionary demands of corn seed when they face establishment uncertainty, and a further adoption of tillage, crop rotations, and warmer temperature could reduce the uncertainty and decrease optimal seeding rate. And our findings suggested two potential beneficials of the reducing corn establishment uncertainty. One is the potential profit gain, and the other is a possible environmental benefits. That's all. Thank you. Any questions? Okay, yeah, I think that's the end of our session. Thank you all.